Good morning. How is everyone doing today? Good. What are we talking about? I'm just kidding. One of these days I'm not going to be kidding. That's going to be horrifying. All woken up late. What are we talking about? Feels really good to be here. I've had a lot of great opportunities to speak here in Olney. And because of that, I wanted to kind of do a connecting lesson to one of my previous sermons that I did back in March called In Good Time, where I talked about the idea of time management and things like that. Because there was an article I read last week in a website that talked about like strange and interesting and true events, and I made this weird backwards connection between that and a lesson I had previously done and a lesson I wanted to work on. We'll begin to that in just a minute. Back in March, when I talked about the idea of in good time, I talked about the principles of time, the idea that time is a constant, we as people are always running out of time, and how it is not up to us to dictate how much time we have left, because we as people would inherently abuse that ability. And one of the things I want to talk about is how we try and dictate and control the concept of time. How, even though with the full knowledge that we cannot control time, how much time we have left, we still try and control the minute aspect of it, the day-to-day. We try and focus on how much time can we trim down. I'm constantly obsessed with time because of my job. I'm constantly obsessed with time because of deadlines, because of deliveries. If a driver is sick, I have to fill in for him. And I ultimately become obsessed with time. And I begin deliberating the factors. If it takes X amount of time to get here, how much time will it take to unload the product, and how much time will it take based on traffic and things like that? I should be back in this amount of time. And when I fall outside of that, when I'm running late because of some unknown variable, I ultimately become frustrated. And we as people become frustrated when we lose the ability to control the minute aspect of time in our lives. When we're stuck in traffic, when we don't quite make that yellow light, all of a sudden our entire day is thrown off, because that 60 to 90 second period, that's it. It's gone. Like we're never getting that back. And so we ultimately become frustrated in these circumstances where we lose the ability. More so when we're standing in line at the store. There's always that. I remember I was at the grocery store a couple of weeks ago, and a very sweet, very polite old lady busted out her checkbook. You guys know what I'm talking about. Yes. And she began inquiring about the amount, and very, very slowly began writing a check. And I'm like, we're living in the future. Just swipe your magic card. And so ultimately, we become frustrated by this. But why do we become frustrated by this? Because we're Christians, we believe in a good and benevolent God, we believe that He has a plan for us, but in that exact moment, it's just not going fast enough, God. And so, before we get to the scripture today, which will be out of Psalm chapter 118, I wanted to share a story with you guys. This story, I feel really bad. I originally discovered this story because of a comedy website where the article was called "People Who Survived Death Because They Were Lazy." And whereas when I read the story, I don't interpret it that way, this particular website portrayed it that way. March 1st, 1950, there was a church in Nebraska. Has anybody heard about this story? This is brand new to me. Brand new information in the year 2012. I'd never heard this story before. This is absolutely amazing. Okay, the website that I pulled this off of has the claim and the status in the story. The claim: when a Nebraska church exploded in 1950, no one was injured because every member of the choir was late arriving for practice that evening. Now here's the story. Here's the really truly bizarre part. It was an extremely committed choir. And the choir director demanded punctuality. She demanded that you be there on time. Practice, you're supposed to get there at 7:20. Be ready to start practice at 7:25. And that's what it is. And there are 15 people in the choir. There are 15 people who are in this choir that are supposed to be there at 7:25. At 7:27, because of a faulty line in the furnace, the church explodes. Approximately 2 minutes after choir practice was supposed to start. Now here's the weird part. These 15 people don't live together. There's not a single unifying event. There's not a carpool. There's not anything like that. At best, 3 members of the choir were going to ride together there. At best. So what we're talking about is not a single unifying event that dictates that these 15 people be late and therefore sparing their lives. I'm talking about 15 people with basically 13 separate cases of being late. I'm talking about the minister's daughter. His 18-month-year-old she had made a mess on her dress, and so they had to iron out a new one, and so they were late. And there was a high school girl who was enraptured by a radio program that she never really listened to before. She was listening to This Is Your Life, and she was just absolutely enraptured by this program, and she was late. There was another girl that was working on a geometry problem. And for some odd reason, she felt absolutely compelled to finish this geometry problem. There were 2 more girls whose car wouldn't start. Their backup ride? The girl working on the geometry problem. who said that she could absolutely not go to choir practice until she finished this problem. The woman who lived across the street from the church just didn't want to go outside because it was so cold. She figured, I'll just wait till everybody else gets there, and I'll go then. One gentleman got caught up talking to his neighbor, and somebody else just fell asleep. I'm going to take a power nap after dinner, 10 minutes, I promise. 45 minutes later, she wakes up and does. Now here's the thing. In an everyday circumstance, these are frustrating circumstances to be part of. Your car won't start, you overslept, you just can't get motivated, you're trying to go, the kids are holding you up. These are everyday common occurrences. There's nothing unique about any of the excuses I just put out there. Because we've all been there. Sleeping right here. I'm the sleeping guy, just in case you're wondering. I'm the guy who wakes up in a tiff getting ready for class when I was in college. You go, oh no, I've overslept. I'm just that guy. Or on occasion, the guy who got caught up talking to his neighbor. But this absolutely mind-boggling event. I'm talking about more than a dozen completely unconnected circumstances that made these people late. And as a result, when the church exploded at 7:27 p.m., 2 minutes after the punctual choir director demanded that they start each and every week, and they had up until that point, they weren't there. The church explodes, the people arrive late to see the burning wreckage, and become immediately panicked. Because here's the thing. I know I'm late. I'm the guy who overslept. And so my immediate reaction is, oh no, everybody else is in that building. And so one by one, the people who are running late arrive at the church. They arrive at the building and they start to piece it together. And they realize that every single one of them is still alive. Now, the reason I wanted to go back and I wanted to look at the concept of in good time, my lesson from back in March, is because I want you to consider this. Just right before we get to the scripture for today. The miraculous elements that are part of this church, put that aside. Put aside the fact that this is clearly a miracle. It is miraculous that these people survived. You put that aside for a minute. Think about the high school students who graduated high school. Think about the jobs they pursued, the families that they led, the chain of events that was dictated by them being alive, the things that we take for granted every day. The pure element of those people went off and they got married and they had children. And those children grew up and those children had jobs. And those children had families. think about the sheer miracle of genealogy. The fact that if circumstances had played out different and these people died in this church fire, then none of that would have happened. And that is the miraculous part to me. The pure idea behind genealogy and just how amazing it is to think about how much we take advantage of that. Please open up your Bibles to Psalm chapter 118, please. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 14. I was so enraptured by this story. I was so awestruck and dumbfounded and surprised by something like this that I had to find a connecting scripture. I had to talk about this. I was just absolutely blown away by this story that happened so many years ago. Psalm 118, starting in verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His love endures forever. Let Israel say, His love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, His love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, His love endures forever. When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord. He brought me into a spacious place. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? The Lord is with me. He is my helper. I look up in triumph on my enemies. Now, before I get to the heart of the message, which is going to be in this next section, I really want to hammer a point home here in verse 7. The Lord is with me. He is my helper. I look in triumph on my enemies. We as Christians forget about the little details. That's why I'm always talking about it. That's why I'm always hammering that point home. The idea of time management and setting aside time and things like that. Because we never really reflect on things like this. I have trouble with it sometimes. The word never is very powerful. I shouldn't never say never. But we often have trouble focusing on the small elements such as these. To truly understand what it is to know a benevolent and loving God. To understand what the circumstances of these people surviving this disaster is. Now here's the thing. I don't want to use this story as a platform. I don't want to use it as a point to look upon the people who doubt me and my faith in my God. And I don't want to stand on a soapbox and say, look at that, look at what God did back in 1950. Because equally, they could pull out any number of tragedies, any number of disasters, and say, well, if that's your argument for God, if that's your argument for faith, then I think it's weak and I'll have nothing to do with it. So I don't want to use it as a platform for that. I don't want to say that this is uncontested proof that God exists and He is good all the time. Because bad things still happen in the world, and that's an element that we as people have to fight with. But I do believe what is said in verses 2, 3, and 4, where it's talking about all the nations and the people saying that His love endures forever. Because I do believe in a loving God. I do believe in an all-powerful God. And I believe in that because of examples like this church in 1950. I believe in it because I think the bigger lesson here are those moments that when we're stuck at red lights, when we're stuck in the grocery store behind somebody. I spent time with my best friend yesterday. I haven't seen him in a while. He came over early afternoon. We spent the whole day together. It was great. And we decided to go to Arundel Mills, which was absolutely a terrifying idea on a Saturday afternoon. Because you hit those circumstances. That guy is clearly going to wait 7.5 minutes for this family to put their children in the car so he could get a terrible parking space. And so it was mind-numbing driving around the mall park, because I live down the street from this mall. I go there on a Tuesday evening, and I have a relatively easy time getting parking. But Saturday afternoon, forget about it. And so we spent all this time driving around and looking for parking spaces and becoming increasingly frustrated. And then eventually we just started laughing. It was like something out of a movie or a sitcom or something, because we would see things like, there's a spot off in the distance, and my friend would punch it, and as we get there, all of a sudden some other car just zips in. And because we had nothing to do, we had nowhere to be specifically, we just laughed. We laughed and we laughed, and we eventually found a terrible parking spot, and we walked 7.2 miles to the church entrance. But the weird thing was, the parking spot was in my driveway. No, I'm just kidding. It's called a hyperbole. And so we lose track of the little aspects of that. And it was good to have my friend there, because on my own, that's a bad situation to be in. All of a sudden, you're talking to the people who clearly can't hear you. Like, I'm going to make motions and talk through this windshield, and hopefully they'll hear me. And so we lose track of those situations, and we never stop to think, maybe there's a reason things are running at this exact pace. One of the reasons being it's 2 o'clock on a Saturday, and I'm kind of stupid sometimes. Let's go to the mall. Looking on verse 8. Verses 8 through 14. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. All the nations surround me, but in the name of the Lord I cut them down. They surround me on every side, but in the name of the Lord I cut them down. They swarm me like bees, but they were consumed as quickly as burning thorns. In the name of the Lord I cut them down. I was pushed back and about to fall, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. I love verse 8 here. That is really the point I wanted to hammer home. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. And do you know why that is? Because humans say that it's okay to completely freak out in a mall parking lot. Humans say that it's completely okay to get stressed out when there's an entire row of people walking in the mall at the exact same speed, and that speed is slow. Humans say that it's perfectly okay to get frustrated at that. I'm in a hurry, I've got places to be, I've got shopping to do, and movies to see, and friends to meet, and I'm running late, and I couldn't find parking. Humans say that's completely okay to get frustrated at that. You know what they call that in the comedy business? They call it first world problems. Because it really is. My first world problem is I forgot to buy milk, and the milk that's in the refrigerator is expired. I guess I'll have to go buy breakfast. As opposed to, I don't know, here's a small example, not having any food at all. Having nothing in the fridge could be an entirely separate issue that is completely unrelated to the milk debacle. But this passage, and I love the poetry of Psalms. I love the poetry of Psalms because it's so passionate and visceral and tangible, and it's something you can hang on to. Verse 10, all the nations surround me, but in the name of the Lord I cut them down. It's such a powerful statement to say that when I'm surrounded by the world, when I'm surrounded by people, when I'm surrounded by ideas and principles and philosophies that say that it's okay to act one way, it's okay to talk one way and act another, because we're only human, right? And so the expectation is no, put that aside. Even if the world surrounds you, even if the world surrounds you with these philosophies and ideas, then take strength in knowing that in the name of the Lord He will protect you. I love the ending passage, the end of the chapter here. Verses 13 and 14, because we've all been in circumstances such as these. Verse 13, I was pushed back and about to fall, but the Lord helped me. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. I love that. I was pushed back and about to fall. I was at the breaking point. I was at the end of my rope. Because here's the thing. I'm going to bust out a little psychology on you guys. That frustration, that we feel when we're stuck behind somebody in line, that frustration that we feel in the parking lot, here's the shocker, it's got absolutely nothing to do with that. It's got nothing to do with the fact that you're having trouble finding a parking spot. There's a deeper issue there. And I don't know what it is. I'm not going to start calling you guys out here on the Lord's Day. You're a problem. No, it's okay. But the frustrations that we feel are reflected in those little spats, those little outbursts that we feel. And we have to come back for that. We have to realize, we have to accept the fact that God truly is all-powerful. That His capability of bringing us back from the edge of the abyss is so powerful that when all the nations of the world surround us, when the world tells us one thing, when the world tells us that we can live this way, the world tells us that we're allowed to be angry and upset and doubtful, we can say that in the name of the Lord, I cut down those ideas. The Lord protects me. He has become my salvation. He is my defense. Powerful words for a powerful message. Because I don't want to downplay that. I don't want to downplay the miraculous nature of how powerful God is. And in turn, His Son came to die for us. In turn, His Son came to die for us so that in the little instances and the big instances of frustration, we can recognize the fact that maybe there's a specific reason for this. Just do me a favor. Think about it once today. The first time you don't make the green light, or the yellow light rather. The first time that happens, think, okay, I've been at this light thousands upon thousands of times on my way home from church. The light lasts for approximately 60 seconds. So 60 seconds of the day gone. So 30 to 60 to 90 seconds. I don't know what your red light pattern is. But think about this. There's at least 30 seconds that's gone out of your day. That's 30 seconds that you're not getting back. 30 more seconds you have to spend in the car. But reflect on that for a minute. Realize that everything you do for the rest of that day is now on a 30-second difference. A 30-second difference. And the first time you dodge something, the first time that you avoid something, just reflect on the fact that, oh, that red light brought me to this moment. I don't expect you guys to keep elaborate clocks, because here's the other aspect of it, the last point I wanted to talk about today. Is we as people, we try and challenge this plan all the time by being frustrated. And looking at our free will versus the plan of God and how they aren't always mutually exclusive. We often choose to follow God's plan. We choose to do the right things. We choose to be good people. Now, ultimately, I only want you to reflect on this. I want you to reflect on the whole 30-second theory, because we can't become obsessed with it. We can't become obsessed with breaking down the code. Last year, Harold Camping of FamilyRadio.com, well, more than since last year, but he decided he was going to break down the code. He decided he was going to figure out the exact time, the exact date in which God was going to come back and the world was going to end. I went on his website last week because I thought this would be a good point to bring up. There's an apology letter on his website. Because you can't debate it any longer. It's been, what's this month? We're in May, right? Ugh. Talk about time going away. But we're way beyond the brink. We're so far beyond the brink that we're coming up on the anniversary of which he said the world was going to end. We are approaching that 1-year anniversary. Happy anniversary, everybody. But we cannot become so consumed and obsessed with breaking down the code and trying to figure out what God's plan is, because if we spend all of our time doing that, then we don't spend time doing the things that matter. And so it's important to realize that it only requires reflection. Just every now and again, just when something good happens, realize that there was a chain of events that led up to this happening. And when something bad happens, realize that there's a chain of events that led up to this happening, but it's either not a big deal or it probably happened for a reason. And so, ultimately, it is up to us to choose whether or not we abide by this theory. It's entirely up to us whether or not we believe that God is our defense. Whether or not we believe that God has become our salvation. That Jesus is our salvation. It is entirely up to us whether or not we accept this. And if you're here today, and you've come to accept it, and you've realized that there is something bigger out there, that there is some secret frustration or fear or uncertainty, and you're looking for clarification, you're looking for assurance, then I ask you to come forward as we stand and sing the song of invitation.